Imagine walking through a medieval town as dusk settles. The streets are narrow and quiet, the timbered houses casting long, wavering shadows in the flickering torchlight. Smoke rises from chimneys, carrying the scent of hearth and bread, but also the faint tang of iron from the forges. Life here is slow, measured, yet always under the weight of uncertainty. Disease, famine, war, and superstition surround every step, and justice, as it is known today, is often replaced by fear, tradition, and the ever-present shadow of punishment. In this world, the line between law and terror is blurred. The town hall or the castle dungeon is both a place of order and a place where human ingenuity has been turned toward discomfort, coercion, and pain. Medieval torture devices are more than mere tools, they are symbols of authority, instruments of social control, and sometimes grimly artistic expressions of the age. Each chain, each iron bracket, each lever is not only a mechanism but a story, a whisper of human suffering, a trace of society's attempt to enforce its rules, and, paradoxically, a window into the minds of those who created and used them. We are not here to shock. We are here to wander slowly, to imagine without judgment, to trace history as it unfolded in quiet darkness. Imagine yourself in a silent corridor of stone, the torches casting their gentle glow along the rough walls, the echoes of footsteps long vanished, the faint metallic tang of the dungeon lingering in the air. Let your mind drift along these hallways, past closed doors behind which countless lives played out in shadowed struggle, and listen, not with your ears alone, but with your imagination. Torture devices, in their chilling precision, reveal not just cruelty but also the medieval mind. They speak of a society attempting to order a chaotic world, a world of sins, heresy, rebellion, and secrecy. Every rack, every iron maiden, every thumbscrew was born from fear, legality, and the dark creativity of human hands. Yet within these shadows, we can find patterns, purpose, even a strange sense of inevitability. These instruments are silent teachers, telling us about power, psychology, and the fragility of human bodies and minds. As we journey deeper, we will meet the inventors and users of these devices, explore their mechanisms, and understand the stories of those who endured them. Each chapter will unfold slowly, allowing you to imagine the textures, the sounds, the slow turn of gears and levers, the weight of iron, the quiet spaces where fear thrived. This is History Softened, History Slowed, a dark, gentle lullaby for your mind, allowing us to observe the past with care, distance, and reflection. The origins of torture. To understand the devices themselves, we must first understand why they existed. Torture did not emerge from nowhere. It was the product of law, religion, and culture converging in a world that was often brutal, unpredictable, and deeply hierarchical. Imagine a medieval town, its castle perched above, overlooking the streets. The ruler, whether a king, duke, or magistrate, holds authority that is both absolute and precarious. Crime is feared, rebellion is punished, and social order is fragile. In these centuries, confession was prized above all. The courts, in both secular and ecclesiastical realms, sought truth in its most complete form. Yet people rarely volunteered their secrets, particularly in cases of treason, heresy, or theft. The solution, in the minds of medieval authorities, was coercion. Torture became the tool to extract confession, reveal conspiracies, and demonstrate the reach of law. It was legal, ritualized, and codified in many places as a dark mirror to our modern notion of justice. But torture was also symbolic. Every device told a story beyond its immediate function. The rack, for instance, did not merely stretch a prisoner's limbs, it conveyed the power of the state, the fragility of flesh, the inevitability of truth emerging under the pressure of authority. To see the rack installed in a courtroom or a dungeon was to witness a form of theater, the subtle drama of law made tangible. Its mechanics were simple, yet its psychological impact was profound. The very sight of the mechanism could compel obedience before a single chain was tightened. The first devices were often crude. Early iron clamps, wooden stocks, and basic restraints were designed as much to shame as to injure. Public punishment, such as the pillory, served as both deterrent and entertainment. Townspeople would gather, observing the discomfort of the accused, their laughter mingling with fear. Torture, at its origins, existed at the intersection of justice and spectacle, morality and performance. Every device was both functional and symbolic. By the 12th and 13th centuries, torture had evolved in sophistication. Inquisitors in Europe, particularly during periods of religious scrutiny, formalized procedures for interrogation. Manuals such as the Malleus Maleficarum advised authorities on legal and spiritual justification. Devices became specialized, each with a specific purpose: stretching, compressing, piercing, or isolating. The act of torture was ritualized. The executioner was trained, the mechanisms maintained, the schedule deliberate. Even the smallest detail, the angle of a screw, the weight of a chain mattered in the orchestration of pain. Yet it is essential to remember that torture devices were not universally applied. They were reserved for those deemed guilty, for those suspected of heresy or rebellion, for those accused of the gravest offenses. The majority of people lived without ever encountering the rack or the Iron Maiden. But for those who did, the experience was all-consuming, a world reduced to chains, steel, and fear. The medieval mind viewed the body as both sacred and vulnerable. Pain was a tool for correction, a medium for truth, and sometimes a form of moral instruction. Religious authorities argued that suffering could purify the soul, that confession gained under duress was acceptable if the intent was moral clarity. Secular rulers, meanwhile, saw torture as a practical method of maintaining social order, preventing rebellion, and demonstrating the reach of their authority. The devices, in this way, were instruments of ideology as much as mechanisms of force. From the early dungeons of castles to the ecclesiastical chambers of inquisitors, the devices became more elaborate over time. Craftsmen, often blacksmiths or carpenters, applied ingenuity to the design of pain. Screws tightened with precision, iron teeth applied pressure at specific points, chains adjusted to immobilize. The physical design reflected a psychological sophistication: fear amplified the pain, anticipation intensified suffering, and the presence of witnesses heightened the dread. Torture, then, was an interplay between body and mind, metal and imagination. But there was also a quieter, subtler side to the history. Some devices were not intended to kill, but to delay, to force reflection, to bring confession without immediate execution. In this sense, medieval torture was less about brutality for its own sake and more about control, measurement, and demonstration. It was a grim science, an art of manipulation within a culture obsessed with order, sin, and salvation. As we move forward, we will explore the instruments themselves, their mechanics, their symbolism, and the human stories that surrounded them. We will trace the lineage from the simple clamps and stocks of the early Middle Ages to the elaborate racks, thumbscrews, and iron maidens that define our imagination of medieval dungeons. Yet we will do so gently, slowly, allowing our minds to wander through the stone halls, the flickering torchlight, and the shadows of history. The origins of torture teach us that even in darkness, there is structure, that fear can be as orderly as mercy, and that human ingenuity can be applied to both creation and destruction. To understand these devices is not to glorify them, but to witness history, to explore the psychology of an age, and to reflect on the fragility of the human body and spirit under societal pressure. The rack and chains. The dungeon lies in shadow. The walls are stone, damp with centuries of unseen moisture, and the air is heavy, tinged with iron and the faint scent of burning torches. In the corner stands a device both simple and terrifying in its purpose: the rack. It is more than wood and rope, it is the embodiment of control, of calculation, of the deliberate orchestration of fear. Its frame is long, enough to stretch the human body to its breaking point, and its surface smooth from years of use, polished by the sweat, tension, and anguish of those who have been bound upon it. Imagine a prisoner being brought forth. The air seems to thicken, the footsteps echoing on the stone floor like the heartbeat of the dungeon itself. Their wrists are bound with cords, their ankles secured with iron shackles. Each rope is threaded through rollers attached to the ends of the frame, and every turn of the ratchet sends a ripple of tension along the body. The rack is precise. It does not rely on chaos. It relies on meticulous design. The mechanics are simple: a lever, a crank, a set of rollers. Yet the effect is devastating. The human body, when stretched beyond its natural limit, feels pain not only in the limbs but in the joints, the spine, the muscles, in the very marrow. But the rack is not only physical. Its terror is psychological. The prisoner knows the leverage. They hear the soft, mechanical click of the crank as it is turned. The executioner works with careful hands, often whispering words of promise or warning. The mind begins to race. How far will it be turned? How many more rotations before sinews tear, before the body yields? Anticipation intensifies suffering in ways the mechanics alone cannot. Torture here is not merely about force, but about the interplay of expectation and fear. Chains, too, are instruments of control. They vary in size and design. Thick iron loops that clamp the wrists or ankles, delicate links that restrict movement while remaining almost imperceptible, chains that suspend the body above the stone floor. Each chain is a conduit of restraint and manipulation. The prisoner's movement becomes impossible, a slow negotiation between flesh and metal. Even in stillness, the chains communicate their authority. They whisper of captivity, compliance, and inevitability. The rack and chains often work together. One can imagine a chamber prepared in meticulous order. The rack occupies the center, with chains coiled on hooks nearby. The prisoner is guided toward the device, each step echoing in the dungeon's stillness. The executioner secures the limbs, adjusts the tension, and then begins the slow, deliberate rotation of the crank. Muscle fibers stretch, joints strain, and the body protests with involuntary movements. Pain grows in waves, rhythmic as the turns of the mechanism, and the prisoner experiences a combination of agony and helplessness that is both physical and mental. Yet in this chamber, not all is chaos. The rack is designed with intention. The executioner knows the device intimately, understanding how far it can stretch a limb before permanent damage occurs, how long a person can endure under tension, and how to calibrate fear. There is art in this cruelty, an exact science born of observation, repetition, and cold pragmatism. The rack's design evolves over centuries, each version an improvement in efficiency, in psychological manipulation, in the careful administration of suffering. Beyond the rack, chains are employed in other subtle ways. A prisoner may be shackled to a wall, forced to kneel, or suspended in a posture that compounds fatigue and stress. Iron rings might secure wrists behind the back, pressing shoulders into unnatural alignment. Feet may be fastened to the floor or raised in midair. The body, trapped in tension, is compelled into submission even before the first direct act of violence. These restraints are reminders that power is as much about position and posture as it is about overt pain. The rack also carries a ceremonial dimension. In some courts, it was placed in a central chamber where witnesses could observe the prisoner's suffering. The sight of the device alone, even when unoccupied, acted as a deterrent. Townsfolk, officials, and other prisoners would see it, and its presence became a language, a visual reminder of authority and consequence. It communicated a silent, yet unmistakable message: to resist is futile, to deceive is perilous. In this way, the rack transcends its material form, becoming a symbol of a bridge between physical experience and the societal message of order enforced through fear. Chains, too, have symbolic resonance. They are marks of bondage, reminders of vulnerability, and instruments that can transform a free person into a passive subject. In the medieval imagination, chains could represent more than physical restraint. They were metaphors for sin, for guilt, for the inexorable weight of moral or civic responsibility. A prisoner bound in chains was not only physically constrained but morally exposed. The act of chaining is an echo of societal expectations, a ritualized method of shaping behavior through fear and anticipation. The relationship between the prisoner and the executioner is central in this environment. The executioner is not merely a technician, they are an orchestrator. Every rotation of the crank, every adjustment of a chain, every tightening of a cuff is deliberate. Their presence is a psychological extension of the device itself. The prisoner is acutely aware of the person controlling their suffering. The executioner's gaze, the subtle posture of hands, the casual turning of a key or a crank all contribute to the prisoner's growing sense of inevitability. Pain and fear merge into a single, relentless rhythm, a slow tide that seems to rise without pause. Consider the interplay of light and shadow in the chamber. Flickering torches cast elongated shadows of the rack and chains across the walls. The chains sway gently, their movements magnified by the flame, creating illusions of serpentine reach and menace. The prisoner's own shadow stretches unnaturally, merging with the devices, blurring the boundary between flesh and instrument. This visual distortion heightens psychological pressure, reinforcing the impression that the chamber itself is alive, a participant in the act of control. Even the sounds of the dungeon are part of the orchestration. The soft creak of wood, the faint grind of metal, the echo of a footstep, the whisper of rope against stone, these are the background symphony. Pain is amplified by sound as much as by force. Every crack, groan, or clink resonates through the space, connecting the body to its surroundings, reminding the prisoner that they are both contained and observed. The rack and chains function not only mechanically but acoustically, creating a full sensory environment of control. Yet, despite the terror they evoke, these devices are often used with caution. Medieval authorities understood that the line between confession and death is delicate. The rack could be adjusted incrementally, chains loosened or tightened with precision, and careful observation ensured that permanent damage was sometimes avoided at least temporarily. In this way, the devices were as much about timing and patience as they were about force. The rhythm of suffering was controlled, measured, extended. The prisoner's body became a canvas upon which fear, pain, and anticipation were painted with deliberate care. Even now, in imagination, one can sense the slow passage of hours within the dungeon. The prisoner on the rack, the chains binding limbs, the executioner turning the crank with deliberate patience, the torches flickering and casting dancing shadows all contribute to a haunting tableau of human ingenuity applied to suffering. It is a world of control, precision, and observation. It is a story of the human mind as much as the human body, demonstrating how fear, anticipation, and meticulous design combine to produce experiences that linger far beyond the moment. The rack and chains are not merely tools of punishment. They are instruments of psychology, law, ritual, and symbolism. They teach us about authority, about obedience, about the interplay of body and mind, and about the careful, calculated ways in which societies can enforce norms. By studying them, we enter into the medieval imagination itself, a place where power is physical, moral, and psychological, and where the boundaries between justice, cruelty, and art are sometimes indistinct. To walk past the rack, to see the chains hanging in silence, is to witness centuries of deliberate design aimed at shaping human behavior. Even in their stillness, they speak. They whisper of the past, of fear, of ingenuity, of control. They are reminders of the fragility of the body, the susceptibility of the mind, and the enduring human desire to dominate, constrain, and understand. And so, as we leave this chamber in thought, we carry with us a sense not only of the mechanics but of the atmosphere, the psychology, and the ritual that surrounds these devices. The rack and chains were never merely metal and wood, they were extensions of society, embodiments of law and fear, instruments of both precision and terror. In this slow exploration, we can observe, imagine, and reflect, allowing the history, the shadows, and the stories embedded in the devices to unfold gently in our minds. The Iron Maiden and Enclosures. As the corridors of medieval dungeons stretch into shadow, we arrive at another chamber, darker, colder, and more solemn than the one we left behind. The walls here are thick, impenetrable, constructed of heavy stone that has absorbed centuries of whispered fears, muffled cries, and the echo of footsteps. Within this chamber stands one of the most infamous of medieval instruments, the Iron Maiden. Its reputation precedes it, whispered through time as a symbol of terror, cruelty, and the ingenuity of human design. Yet to approach it slowly, with thoughtfulness and imagination, is to see not merely a device, but a reflection of society, law, and the human mind. The Iron Maiden is a coffin-like structure, tall and narrow, its metal surface cold and unyielding. It opens along a hinge, revealing a hollow interior designed to accommodate a human body standing upright. Lining its interior are spikes, sharp and angled, placed to inflict pain without immediately ending life. The precision is meticulous. Each spike is positioned not randomly but calculated to maximize suffering while prolonging the process. Imagine the body enclosed within, limbs slightly bent, back pressed against the steel, every inch of flesh threatened by the silent geometry of iron. But the Iron Maiden is more than metal and spikes, it is a psychological instrument. Its very presence instills dread, long before a person steps inside. The prisoner is led into the chamber slowly, aware of the looming shape, the gleaming steel, the promises of pain whispered by the shadows. The mind begins to race. How sharp are the spikes? How deep will the punctures be? How long can one endure standing against unyielding iron? Anticipation alone becomes a weapon, preparing the body to feel pain more acutely than any strike. Enclosures of various kinds accompany the Iron Maiden throughout medieval dungeons. Gibbets, cages, and metal frameworks serve both as restraint and spectacle. Picture a cage suspended in a courtyard, empty but ominous, its bars thick and unforgiving. The prisoner confined within can see only a fragment of the world beyond, the sky a distant rectangle, the ground a cruelly angled plane. Hunger, thirst, and exposure become companions to fear, a slow accumulation of psychological torment that rivals any device of direct physical pain. These enclosures, like the Iron Maiden, are statements. They communicate societal authority and the inevitability of consequence. They are architecture designed to control, to contain, to amplify the vulnerability of the human form. The Iron Maiden also carries symbolic resonance. It is a container of judgment, a coffin of warning, a testament to the societal intertwining of sin, crime, and punishment. Its spikes resemble the thorny crown of legend, a reminder of suffering as both moral lesson and legal instrument. Every spike, every hinge, every shadow cast by torchlight becomes a metaphor for the reach of authority, a silent lecture in pain and inevitability. To encounter the Iron Maiden is to be reminded that the medieval mind did not separate body, spirit, or law, all were interwoven, and suffering was a tangible expression of cosmic and societal order. Imagine, then, the prisoner was placed inside. Movement is limited, forced into a position that is both unnatural and unavoidable. The door is closed with a slow, resonant clang, the sound echoing through stone corridors. Darkness envelopes the body, amplifying sensation, heightening awareness. Each breath draws in the stale air of the chamber, mingled with the faint metallic tang of the steel itself. Time stretches, disoriented by fear and confinement. The mind begins to drift, oscillating between vivid anticipation and numbed endurance. The Iron Maiden, while stationary, transforms perception, it becomes an agent of both mind and body, controlling not only limbs but thought, imagination, and memory. Beyond the Iron Maiden, other enclosures amplify the interplay of fear and restraint. The gibbet, often used for public display, suspends or confines the condemned, exposing them to the elements and to the gaze of the community. Here, the body becomes an instrument of teaching, its suffering a lesson visible to all. The cages hung from poles, the metal frameworks of dungeons, even the tightly fitted stocks each contribute to a theater of authority. The prisoner is both actor and audience, experiencing confinement while demonstrating societal order to all who observe. The Iron Maiden also demonstrates the sophistication of medieval craftsmanship. Its construction is precise, each joint, hinge, and spike carefully engineered. Blacksmiths and metalworkers applied skill not only for function but for subtle control over the psychological experience. The spike's length, placement, and angle were calculated to maximize tension without causing immediate death, prolonging awareness of threat and heightening mental anguish. The device is a testament to technical ingenuity, albeit in service of fear and suffering. In this chamber, the ambient sounds are subtle yet penetrating. The faint echo of dripping water, the slight groan of wooden supports under weight, the whisper of air through stone vents all create an atmosphere of suspense and dread. Even in silence, the devices speak. The Iron Maiden waits, the cages loom, the shadows stretch across the floor. Every step, every movement is heightened by anticipation. The prisoner's imagination becomes a partner to the instruments, extending their reach beyond physical contact. The psychological impact of these devices is as profound as their physical effects. Humans, when confined and threatened, experience fear and tension that amplify any discomfort. The Iron Maiden and enclosures manipulate perception. The prisoner cannot see beyond immediate limits, cannot predict precise consequences, and is acutely aware of restraint. This interplay between control and uncertainty is central to their design. Pain, in many cases, is secondary to anticipation and confinement. The devices are as much about the mind as they are about the body. Even the positioning of enclosures within the dungeon carries significance. The Iron Maiden may occupy a central chamber, visible from corridors, its silhouette a constant reminder of consequences. Cages and stocks may face windows or torches, ensuring visibility, ensuring that fear spreads not only to those within but to those who pass nearby. Architecture, design, and placement are integral to the function. These instruments are embedded within a spatial narrative. Every corridor, every doorway, every flicker of light contributes to the story of control, submission, and dread. The craftsmanship extends beyond mechanics to subtle cues of intimidation. Smooth metal surfaces gleam with menace, bolts and rivets catch torchlight like tiny points of vigilance, and every shadow cast across the walls enhances perception of sharpness, depth, and danger. Even without contact, the devices communicate authority and inevitability. A prisoner entering the chamber senses the precision of design, the careful calibration of fear. The mind is engaged long before the body is restrained. Enclosures also include variations designed for prolonged psychological torment. Suspension cages, narrow standing boxes, or confined stalls force unnatural postures, heightening fatigue, discomfort, and anxiety. Time stretches interminably as the body endures tension, and the mind oscillates between hope and despair. Hunger, thirst, and isolation intensify experience. These devices are slow-acting instruments, designed to teach patience, submission, and the consequences of resistance. The chamber becomes both theater and laboratory, a controlled environment for observation, fear, and societal demonstration. The Iron Maiden, while perhaps the most famous, exists within a continuum of design and intent. Each device in the dungeon, each chain, spike, or cage contributes to a complex orchestration of authority. Pain, fear, and restraint are carefully calibrated, applied with awareness, and observed with intent. The prisoner's experience is not random but meticulously managed. Anticipation, helplessness, and physical sensation intertwine to produce total immersion in a world governed by others' control. Even today, imagining the chamber allows us to witness the medieval mindset. The devices were not merely tools of cruelty, they were expressions of law, power, and social order. They are artifacts of thought, demonstrating how society sought to maintain compliance and authority, and how fear could be engineered and distributed through space, sound, and physical design. The Iron Maiden and enclosures speak to the deliberate shaping of human experience, a chilling lesson in the intersection of material, mind, and societal intent. To leave the chamber, one steps back into corridors softened by torchlight, shadows stretching across stone. The Iron Maiden stands silent, the cages loom, the echoes of imagined suffering linger in the mind. The devices are still, yet their presence is vivid, teaching history gently through imagination, reflection, and careful observation. In the quiet, the mind absorbs not only the mechanics of pain but the architecture of fear, the rhythm of anticipation, and the sophistication of medieval design. And so, as we leave this chamber in thought, we carry the impression of structure, calculation, and psychological depth. The Iron Maiden and enclosures are not merely instruments, they are windows into an era, a society, and a mind fascinated by control, restraint, and the delicate interplay of body and spirit. In our slow journey through history, these devices teach patience, awareness, and reflection, allowing the shadows of the past to settle gently in our imagination. Devices of restraint and pain. The dungeon stretches onward, a labyrinth of stone and shadow, where the air feels dense with centuries of fear, whispered confessions, and the quiet resonance of countless mechanisms. In this chamber, we focus not on a single device, but on a collection and ensemble of restraint and discomfort, each instrument crafted to bind the body, limit motion, and amplify the mind's sense of helplessness. Here, the tactile reality of iron, wood, and rope is inextricably bound to the psychological drama of captivity. Imagine entering slowly. The flickering torchlight dances along the walls, catching the polished surfaces of manacles, chains, shackles, and clamps. Each tool hangs in silence, yet communicates authority, inevitability, and precision. The first glance draws you to the manacles, iron loops designed to secure wrists or ankles with exacting strength. They vary in size and weight. Some delicate enough to seem almost ornamental, others heavy, cold, and oppressive, designed to remind the prisoner of the inexorable weight of restraint. When locked around flesh, they leave little freedom of movement, compelling compliance with the laws and expectations imposed from beyond the dungeon's walls. The chains coiled nearby are equally deliberate in design. Thick iron links glinting with age and wear are poised for multiple applications, suspending, binding, or immobilizing. Each chain has its own language of tension and slack, of sound and resistance. The prisoner's body becomes a participant in a silent dialogue with metal, every movement measured, every struggle reinforcing the dominance of the device over the individual. Even the simplest chain is an instrument of psychological precision, transforming anticipation into palpable pressure, prolonging the mind's awareness of confinement. Thumbscrews occupy another area of the chamber, smaller yet no less formidable. These instruments target specific extremities, fingers, toes, applying incremental pressure through a simple yet relentless mechanism. The ratchet turns slowly, deliberately, and each click resonates not only against bone and flesh but within the mind. The prisoner's perception stretches with the movement, time dilates, and sensation becomes magnified. Pain is both mechanical and imagined, extended by fear, uncertainty, and the slow rhythm of the device. Stocks, another restraint, serve a dual purpose, immobilization and public demonstration. Wooden frames with holes for wrists and heads force a person into a position of helplessness, often in view of townsfolk or fellow prisoners. Here, restraint is theatrical. The victim's posture communicates social and moral judgment, turning suffering into spectacle. Chains may accompany stocks, further limiting motion and enhancing vulnerability. Each element is deliberate. Height, angle, and fit are calculated to maximize discomfort and enforce the authority of law and custom. Racks of smaller devices hang in an orderly array, each designed for subtle, incremental torment. Neck yokes, shoulder braces, iron collars, and foot presses manipulate posture, pressure, and leverage. The prisoner's body is no longer free to move, stretch, or adjust. Muscles stiffen, joints ache, and fatigue becomes almost unbearable. Yet these devices rarely kill outright, they are instruments of control, coercion, and mental domination. Pain is administered slowly, rhythmically, and predictably, extending consciousness and awareness of every constraint. Suspension devices occupy a darker corner. Chains, hooks, and brackets allow the human body to be raised, twisted, or held in positions that defy natural comfort. Gravity, weight, and strain become allies of the instrument. Time becomes elastic, minutes stretch into hours. The prisoner's body, suspended, contorted, or confined, communicates helplessness, reinforcing the psychological power of restraint. Even in imagined movement, the body anticipates tension, pressure, and the sensation of being caught between freedom and control. Clamps and braces are designed to target specific limbs or joints. Knee, elbow, or wrist braces compress and hold, while metal bands pinch and restrain. Each device is tailored to particular anatomical features, demonstrating a level of observation and experimentation that blends practicality with deliberate cruelty. The tactile sensation of metal pressing against skin, the unyielding cold, the immobility imposed by iron all create a slow, insistent message to the mind: resistance is measured, observed, and countered. Even belts and girdles are instruments of restraint. Leather or metal, often fastened tight against the torso, restrict movement while adding weight and pressure. Some devices combine several methods: chains loop through braces, collars interlock with cuffs, belts reinforce the pressure of clamps. The interplay between multiple restraints creates a complex orchestration of sensation and anticipation. Each device amplifies the others, producing a layered experience of control and vulnerability. The chamber itself enhances the effects. Its acoustics allow every click, groan, or scrape of metal to resonate across stone. Flickering torchlight casts moving shadows that exaggerate the shapes of devices, twisting perception and enhancing the sense of threat. Even the temperature and humidity play subtle roles, affecting skin, muscle, and comfort. The medieval craftsman understood that the environment was part of the instrument, that metal and stone worked in concert to produce total immersion in restraint. The psychological dimension is as deliberate as the mechanical. A prisoner confronted with multiple devices must anticipate each. The mind cycles through fear, dread, and imagination. What will be used first? How will the body respond? How long can one endure before fatigue, pain, or despair dominate consciousness? The prisoner's thoughts, tension, and imagination become as important to the process as the devices themselves. Each restraint is a teacher, demonstrating power, control, and inevitability. Even minor tools, shackles, foot irons, or wrist bands play crucial roles. Their simplicity masks their psychological potency. The mere presence of metal, cold and unyielding, restricts movement, limits posture, and enforces awareness of confinement. Combined with larger devices like racks or suspension frameworks, the ensemble creates a controlled environment in which every motion, breath, and thought is influenced by the instruments themselves. Chains can be positioned to allow minimal motion, producing discomfort without causing permanent injury. Levers, screws, and hooks adjust pressure and angle incrementally. This precision allows executioners to modulate the prisoner's experience, prolonging awareness of restraint and maximizing psychological impact. The tools are instruments of manipulation as much as pain, combining mechanics, observation, and anticipation. Manacles, sometimes padded, sometimes bare, teach stillness, patience, and submission. The body learns to adapt to constraint, the mind to predict and fear its limits. These devices transform the simplest movements into impossible challenges. To raise a hand, to shift weight, to adjust posture, each is calculated and measured against the instrument's capacity to enforce restraint. Rope, often overlooked, is another key instrument. Bound, twisted, and threaded through wooden or metal fixtures, it creates tension, amplifies weight, and prevents adjustment. The friction of cord against skin, the precise knotting, the subtle stretch, all are part of the orchestration of restraint. Rope and chain together create a network of confinement, multiplying the sensation of captivity. The prisoner's perception of time is altered. Each moment in restraint feels elongated. The slow stretch of muscle, the incremental tightening of cuffs, the rhythmic tension of chains all create a sensation of endless duration. Psychological pressure is compounded by anticipation, imagination, and the slow unfolding of restraint. Pain becomes measured, observed, and enhanced by the careful orchestration of time and attention. Even the smallest details are considered. The weight of metal, the cold surface of iron, the angles of joints, the spacing of chains, each element contributes to the cumulative experience. The prisoner becomes acutely aware of texture, temperature, position, and limitation. Every breath, every heartbeat, every subtle movement is framed by the instruments themselves. The chamber, devices, and environment together create a multisensory orchestration of restraint and pain. Torchlight, shadow, metal, stone, and rope combine to form a controlled, immersive space. The prisoner experiences not only physical limitation but a complex interplay of fear, anticipation, and awareness. Every device, from the smallest cuff to the largest suspension frame, contributes to this experience. In this slow exploration, we begin to understand the medieval mind. The tools of restraint and pain are not random, they are deliberate, precise, and deeply psychological. The medieval craftsman and executioner were observers of human anatomy, behavior, and fear. Every device is designed to prolong awareness, maximize anticipation, and enforce submission. Through them, we glimpse the careful orchestration of suffering, the measured application of force, and the complex relationship between body, mind, and societal authority. And as we leave the chamber, stepping back into the shadows of the dungeon, the manacles hang silent, chains coil in waiting, and each device speaks its language of restraint, anticipation, and controlled pain. They are instruments of law, psychology, and art, reminders of the delicate balance between authority and vulnerability, body and mind, fear and endurance. In the quiet of imagination, we carry their lessons, observing history with reflection, care, and a slow awareness of the human experience. Torture in trials and justice. The stone corridors of medieval halls extend quietly, their silence broken only by the distant drip of water and the soft shuffle of feet across uneven flagstones. Here, justice is not merely adjudicated with words or written law, it is enacted through demonstration, through physical experience, and through a slow, deliberate negotiation between authority and subject. Torture, in this context, is not a random cruelty but a carefully calibrated instrument of investigation, persuasion, and spectacle. It intertwines the legal process with the psychological and physical orchestration of pain, restraint, and anticipation. To imagine a trial, one must first imagine the chamber. The walls are thick, the air damp and heavy. Torches flicker in sconces, casting light that dances across the faces of the accused, the officials, and the observing crowd. At the center lie the instruments of coercion, racks, iron clamps, chains, and various devices of measured torment. Their presence is deliberate. Before a word is spoken, before testimony begins, the chamber communicates authority. Its architecture, the arrangement of tools, and even the positioning of the benches and tables are designed to establish hierarchy, expectation, and fear. The accused is led into this chamber slowly. The steps echo faintly on stone floors, each footfall amplifying tension. The mind anticipates the instruments arrayed around them, imagining how each could be applied. Chains hang ready, manacles glint in torchlight, and racks await with their mechanical patience. Even the smallest device becomes an agent of suggestion, the mere sight of iron communicates consequence. The body prepares involuntarily, muscles tightening, breath quickening, nerves heightening sensitivity to both sight and sound. Within these trials, torture functions as both proof and persuasion. Medieval courts often sought confessions not only of guilt but of association, motive, and complicity. Devices like the rack or iron clamps became instruments of narrative, shaping testimony through incremental, controlled pain. The executioner applied tension, twist, or compression gradually, observing the prisoner's reactions, modulating force, and ensuring endurance. The goal was not necessarily death, but revelation. Pain became a language, each twist, stretch, or pressure point a question, and every involuntary reaction a response interpreted by those observing. Chains and stocks, too, serve as instruments of testimony. A prisoner might be bound in a position of discomfort for hours before questioning begins. Muscles stiffen, posture strains, fatigue grows, and the mind becomes pliable, eager to end suffering. The environment itself, damp stone, flickering torchlight, and the muted echo of distant chambers intensifies psychological pressure. Even before a word is spoken, the prisoner's awareness of confinement, restraint, and the instruments surrounding them amplifies suggestibility. Suspension devices add another dimension to these trials. Hanging chains, brackets, and hooks position the body in ways that increase discomfort, restrict mobility, and heighten anticipation. The verticality of suspension forces muscles into unnatural tension, ligament strain, and joints protest. Time slows. Each breath, each heartbeat, each involuntary twitch is amplified by the knowledge that the body is constrained beyond its natural capacity. Here, the body becomes a collaborator in interrogation, guided by both fear and anticipation. Pain is applied gradually, methodically, almost rhythmically. The executioner adjusts tension incrementally, observes microexpressions, and interprets subtle movements. Even minimal discomfort can produce exaggerated mental effects when sustained, repeated, or anticipated. The medieval observer understood that torture is as much about timing, patience, and attention as it is about force. Each moment is orchestrated to extend awareness of both physical sensation and psychological consequence. In some trials, the instruments are not used immediately but serve as a looming presence. The accused may be left in sight of the devices, knowing that non-compliance or unsatisfactory testimony could trigger their application. This slow, anticipatory form of coercion amplifies the mental impact of restraint. The body braces for pain even when none is applied, muscles tighten, and the mind oscillates between hope and dread. In this way, the instruments themselves function as silent interrogators, influencing behavior without direct contact. The intersection of law and torture is complex. Medieval authorities often justified the use of instruments as necessary for justice, investigation, or deterrence. Pain was not arbitrary, it was an instrument of governance, designed to produce compliance, reveal truth, and demonstrate authority. The chamber, the devices, and the procedures together created a controlled environment in which human experience could be measured, observed, and interpreted. The executioner, judge, and scribe worked in concert, each contributing to the orchestration of legal pain. Even the smallest adjustments in devices were deliberate. The ratchet on a thumb screw, the tension of a chain, the position of a cuff, the angle of a spike all influenced the prisoner's perception and response. The mind cannot separate mechanical sensation from psychological expectation. Each incremental change produces a ripple of anticipation and awareness, heightening the effectiveness of restraint. The medieval trial, therefore, is both physical and cognitive, manipulating not only the body but the mind. Public observation also played a role. Some trials were conducted where witnesses could see the instruments and the restrained prisoner. Here, the devices communicated social and moral lessons. Chains, manacles, and racks were not only instruments of coercion but symbols of societal order. The suffering of the body was transformed into a demonstration of consequence, obedience, and the reach of authority. The psychological impact extended beyond the prisoner to all who observed, reinforcing norms and expectations through a carefully choreographed tableau. Even the ambient sounds of the chamber enhanced the process. The groan of chains, the scrape of metal, the faint drip of water, and the soft footsteps of officials all contributed to the prisoner's heightened perception of time, tension, and environment. Pain was amplified not only by direct application but by the orchestration of sound, light, and shadow. Every element from torchlight to stone texture was part of a controlled sensory environment designed to manipulate awareness and anticipation. In some cases, instruments were combined for cumulative effect. A prisoner might be stretched on a rack while chains and clamps limit motion elsewhere. Suspension devices could compound fatigue and discomfort. Thumb screws or finger presses might be applied simultaneously to increase vulnerability. Each device adds a layer, each adjustment enhances psychological and physical impact. The interplay between multiple instruments demonstrates the sophistication of medieval design, careful calibration, and attention to cumulative effect. The prisoner's perception of time is central to the experience. Each rotation of a crank, each tightening of a clamp, each subtle adjustment elongates awareness. The mind measures pain, anticipates the next increment, and interprets every signal from the body. This temporal manipulation, the stretching of seconds into minutes, and minutes into hours is a hallmark of medieval interrogation. Instruments are not merely mechanical. They are temporal frameworks, shaping perception as much as restraining the body. Even minor devices, foot irons, collars, shoulder braces, play essential roles. Their simplicity masks profound psychological potency. The mere sensation of pressure, weight, and limitation teaches patience, submission, and awareness of control. The prisoner becomes acutely conscious of every movement, every posture, every potential adjustment. The instruments create a dialogue between body, mind, and authority, orchestrating a continuous negotiation of endurance and anticipation. Medieval trials using torture were as much about observation as about coercion. Executioners and officials watched carefully, noting reactions, assessing compliance, and timing adjustments. The prisoner's responses, physical flinches, involuntary groans, facial expressions became data, informing subsequent application of force. The devices themselves, combined with human observation, created a controlled experiment in endurance, fear, and compliance. Even as the prisoner experienced repeated tension, the instruments were designed to avoid immediate death. The goal was confession, information, or demonstration, not finality. Pain was prolonged, observation maintained, and psychological pressure extended. Devices such as racks, chains, clamps, and suspensions worked in concert with timing, observation, and environment to produce a comprehensive experience of constraint, fear, and endurance. The chamber teaches us about medieval society, law, and psychology. The instruments, though terrifying, were carefully engineered. They reflect a deep understanding of human anatomy, sensation, and behavior. They reveal a mindset in which authority, law, and societal control were expressed not only through decrees but through carefully managed experience of body and mind. The devices of torture, in their mechanical precision and psychological orchestration, are as much reflections of human ingenuity as they are of cruelty. As we step back from this chamber, leaving behind racks, chains, and clamps, the echoes of imagined suffering linger. The instruments remain silent, yet their lessons endure. They teach patience, observation, and reflection on the relationship between authority, body, and mind. The medieval mind, through law and torture, orchestrated experiences that are at once mechanical, psychological, and symbolic. In the quiet of imagination, we carry these lessons forward, observing history not only with awareness of cruelty but with recognition of complexity, intention, and human ingenuity. Instruments of psychological fear. The dungeon's corridors seem endless, stretching in silent, shadowed corridors that absorb every whisper, every shiver of movement. Here, in this quieter wing, the focus shifts from physical pain to the subtler, more insidious force of psychological torment. These are the instruments designed not to tear flesh but to ensnare the mind, to manipulate perception, to twist hope into anxiety and anticipation into dread. They operate with patience, precision, and a chilling awareness of human perception. To understand these instruments, one must imagine the chamber itself, high ceilings of cold stone, torches burning with an unsteady flicker, casting elongated shadows that seem to stretch and shift when no one moves. The walls, damp and textured, amplify sound, the faint scrape of a metal hinge, the whisper of movement, the soft, deliberate echo of footsteps. In such a place, silence is itself a tool, each pause and stillness amplifying tension. Fear is built as much by absence as by presence. Among these instruments are cells and cages designed for isolation. The solitary confinement cell, small and windowless, limits perception and exaggerates time. A prisoner placed within experience hours as if they were days. The mind, starved for stimuli, begins to fill the void with imagined threats. Sounds from distant corridors echo ominously. Shadows from flickering torchlight on the stone walls take on exaggerated forms. Every slight creak of metal becomes portentous. Isolation amplifies anxiety, heightens anticipation, and turns perception inward, making every moment of waiting a psychological instrument. Darkened corridors leading to these cells are lined with simple devices, iron rings embedded in walls, hooks, and chains whose function is not immediately revealed. Their presence communicates possibility without specificity. The prisoner does not know what awaits, only that restraint, control, and observation are constant. The unknown magnifies fear, and anticipation becomes a mechanism of torment. The mind, deprived of certainty, fills every gap with imagined horrors, creating an experience often more potent than the application of direct pain. The layout of the dungeon itself serves as a psychological instrument. Narrow passageways, low ceilings, and irregular flooring limit movement and orientation. A prisoner may not know if they are ascending or descending, how far a corridor extends, or what awaits at its end. This deliberate disorientation creates vulnerability, heightens awareness, and extends anticipation. Each step becomes measured, each breath conscious, each pause weighted with expectation. The architecture, silent and static, becomes a companion to fear. Devices like sound chambers amplify this effect. Small, enclosed spaces echo whispers, footsteps, or distant clanks, making them seem closer or larger than they are. The mind interprets these sounds as imminent threats. A mere draught of air, a drop of water, the faint groan of a wooden support, all are magnified into imagined movement, heightening tension. These chambers manipulate perception as effectively as any iron cuff or rack, demonstrating the medieval understanding of the interplay between environment and mind. The use of light is equally deliberate. Flickering torchlight, reflected across polished metal or irregular stone, creates shifting shadows. Chains hang suspended, their silhouettes stretching across walls. Shadows elongate and contract with movement, creating a sense of presence where none exists. The prisoner's eyes adjust constantly, searching for threats, reacting to subtle changes, amplifying anxiety. Light and shadow become partners in psychological torment, manipulating perception with subtlety and precision. Isolation also introduces the instrument of waiting. A prisoner may be left in a cell or cage for hours, their only companion the uncertainty of what comes next. Time becomes subjective, moments stretching interminably. Anticipation becomes a form of torment, as the mind conjures scenarios of what might occur. Every imagined sound, every imagined movement, adds to the body's tension, increasing sensitivity to future stimuli. This form of psychological manipulation is slow, cumulative, and deeply effective. Fear of exposure is another instrument. Chains, stocks, or open cells placed where the prisoner is visible to others magnify anxiety. The awareness that observation may occur at any moment by officials, guards, or even fellow prisoners amplifies self-consciousness and perception of vulnerability. The instruments themselves, though not always engaged in physical torment, impose restraint through the mere possibility of observation. Social awareness becomes a mechanism of psychological control. Even devices designed to mimic pain without causing actual injury play a role. The mock instrument, a device appearing threatening but incapable of inflicting lasting harm, engages the mind. The prisoner reacts as if in danger. Anticipation alone produces heightened tension, muscle readiness, and a sense of helplessness. These instruments rely entirely on perception. What is seen, imagined, or suggested becomes a form of torment. The body responds faithfully to the mind's interpretation, producing real physiological responses to imagined threats. Medieval dungeons also employed subtle auditory manipulations. Water dripping in rhythmic patterns, iron chains scraping silently, or distant doors opening and closing with soft creaks, all serve to create unpredictability. The mind searches for cause and meaning, heightening sensitivity and anticipation. The prisoner becomes attuned to every detail, interpreting faint sounds as signals of impending restraint or action. This orchestration demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of the mind's response to uncertainty and environmental cues. The psychological instruments extend to social manipulation as well. Prisoners might be placed where they can hear others' screams, pleas, or confessions. Even when not directly observed, hearing the pain of others amplifies one's own anxiety, creating anticipation and fear. The mind extrapolates potential outcomes, heightening distress. This layering of sensory input, sight, sound, and isolation becomes an intricate web of psychological pressure. Suspension devices also function psychologically. The mere knowledge that a body could be raised, twisted, or constrained in unnatural positions creates anticipation. Even when devices are not actively used, their presence communicates potential action. The prisoner imagines the experience, feels the weight of restriction in mind and body, and the body responds as if threatened. These instruments demonstrate that fear itself can be as potent as any mechanical application of force. Lighting, shadow, sound, space, isolation, observation, and expectation combine in orchestrated environments designed to heighten anticipation and vulnerability. Medieval designers of dungeons understood the mind's susceptibility to suggestion, perception, and uncertainty. Instruments of psychological fear are subtle, pervasive, and immersive, affecting body and mind simultaneously. They operate continuously, before, during, and after the application of physical devices. Even elements as simple as the arrangement of objects, the spacing of bars, or the placement of doorways contribute to anxiety. Narrow hallways evoke a sense of confinement, dark corners suggest lurking threats, and unexpected changes in floor texture signal potential traps. Every detail is carefully considered to enhance the prisoner's sense of uncertainty and anticipation. The mind, deprived of predictability and comfort, amplifies every experience. A faint noise becomes a signal, a shadow becomes a presence, a pause becomes suspense. This manipulation demonstrates the medieval understanding of fear as a tool, as effective as chains, clamps, or racks. The prisoner's body, responding to mental tension, becomes attuned to anticipation, producing subtle physiological responses, muscle tightness, increased heart rate, heightened awareness, and a constant state of readiness. Even before physical torture is applied, these instruments prime the body and mind. Anxiety is a slow, cumulative torment, producing readiness for pain, hypervigilance, and increased sensitivity. The prisoner's experience is not merely mechanical, it is holistic, immersive, and carefully orchestrated. The instruments of psychological fear are silent, subtle, and relentless. To understand these devices fully is to recognize their cumulative effect. Isolation, sound, shadow, anticipation, observation, and subtle environmental manipulation together create an experience more complex than any single mechanical device. The medieval mind designed these instruments to extend influence beyond direct contact, manipulating perception, thought, and awareness with patience, subtlety, and precision. As we leave this chamber, the shadows remain, the corridors stretch endlessly, and the instruments sit silently, awaiting the mind's engagement. They are powerful not because of their immediate application but because they operate continuously on awareness, expectation, and imagination. In this quiet reflection, we see the sophistication of medieval understanding, that fear, anticipation, and perception are as potent as the rack or the iron maiden. In the stillness, one absorbs not only the methods but the intent. Medieval psychological instruments teach us about patience, observation, and the interplay between mind, body, and environment. They remind us that fear can be orchestrated, that restraint can be mental as well as physical, and that human experience can be shaped subtly yet profoundly through anticipation, isolation, and perception. And as we step back into the flickering light of the outer corridors, leaving behind cells, chains, and shadows, the echoes of imagined fear linger. The lessons of psychological instruments remain: perception shapes reality, anticipation shapes endurance, and the mind itself can become an instrument of restraint. In the quiet of imagination, we carry forward the subtle, profound understanding of fear, history, and the deliberate orchestration of human experience. The role of torture in society and spectacle. The heavy wooden doors of the medieval hall swing open slowly, revealing a chamber bathed in muted torchlight. Stone walls rise in austere silence, absorbing every whisper, every shuffle, every creaking hinge. This is a space where pain becomes performance, where instruments of restraint and discomfort transform into instruments of social order. Torture, in the context of society, is never private. It is both a legal tool and a communal ritual, an orchestrated demonstration of authority that shapes not only the individual but the collective consciousness of those who witness it. Imagine the chamber as it might have appeared to a medieval townsperson arriving for observation. The air is thick with anticipation and an undercurrent of fear. Devices of restraint, meticulously arranged, glint faintly in the flickering light. Chains hang ready, manacles lie in neat rows, and the heavy rack waits patiently. Each object communicates authority and consequence. The architecture itself amplifies the gravity of the scene. Narrow corridors lead observers into a focused line of sight, directing attention to the instruments and, inevitably, the figure of the accused. Every detail from torch placement to bench orientation is carefully orchestrated to maximize the psychological impact on both the prisoner and the spectators. Torture in this context is an elaborate theater. Its audience is not merely officials or executioners, it is the town, the village, the community that witnesses both the threat and the consequence. Devices such as stocks or pillories place the victim in public view, immobilizing the body while exposing it to judgment. The suffering becomes a lesson, an immediate and visible enforcement of societal norms. The prisoner's posture, constrained by wood and iron, communicates moral and civic messages. Obedience, transgression, and the reach of authority are encoded in every rigid joint, every strained muscle, every shiver of anticipation. Chains and shackles, although simple in design, gain amplified meaning in the public sphere. Suspended or displayed, they become symbolic. They articulate the inevitability of law and consequence. Even the faint creak of a hinge or the gentle tap of iron against stone sends a subtle message to observers: the instruments are capable, precise, and deliberate. The communal awareness of these mechanisms extends beyond immediate participants, embedding lessons of fear and compliance within the collective imagination. The performance of torture is also rhythmic. Executioners apply force methodically, adjusting pressure incrementally on racks, chains, or clamps. These deliberate motions communicate authority and control. Observers witness the choreography of restraint, seeing not only the physical act but the calculated orchestration that ensures both endurance and revelation. Every turn of a crank, every tightening of a screw, every stretch or suspension communicates order, skill, and the inevitability of consequence. The instruments themselves become actors in the theater of law. Spectacle intensifies when anticipation is orchestrated alongside action. Prisoners may be presented before devices but not immediately subjected to them. The mere presence of racks, chains, or iron braces communicates possibility. The audience perceives the latent potential for pain, imagining its application and witnessing the prisoner's constrained reactions. Fear, expectation, and social messaging intertwine. The psychological dimension is as potent as the physical. Anticipation becomes part of the performance, extending the influence of the instruments beyond direct contact. Public trials often utilize devices designed for incremental application. Thumb screws, finger presses, and suspension hooks might be applied gradually, prolonging awareness of restraint and amplifying suspense. Spectators observe the prisoner's subtle movements, flinches, muscle twitches, shifts of posture, interpreting them as responses to authority. In this way, torture becomes not only a tool for confession or investigation but a communal experience, a shared lesson in compliance, morality, and consequence. Devices designed for display serve dual purposes. Stocks and pillories communicate restraint and public shame simultaneously. The prisoner's helplessness becomes a visual metaphor for the social contract, illustrating the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Chains or cuffs, when prominently displayed, emphasize the inevitability of punishment. Even instruments not actively engaged in causing pain carry psychological and symbolic weight. Their presence alone enforces order, anticipation, and social cohesion. Light and shadow play a central role in spectacle. Flickering torchlight illuminates devices, highlighting the tension of chains, the cold rigidity of iron, and the unnatural angles imposed by braces or racks. Shadows stretch across stone walls, creating illusions of size and presence. The prisoner's silhouette, rigid and constrained, communicates submission and vulnerability. The interplay of light, shadow, and posture magnifies the emotional impact, reinforcing the dual purpose of both observation and instruction. Sound also functions as a communal instrument. The scrape of iron, the faint creak of wood under tension, and the measured clink of chains echo across the hall. Even subtle auditory cues communicate authority, timing, and consequence. The prisoner's reactions, vocal or silent, are interpreted by spectators as evidence of compliance, guilt, or moral failing. Every movement, sound, and pause contributes to the overall orchestration of fear, spectacle, and social control. Torture as a social spectacle also reinforces hierarchy. Officials, judges, and executioners occupy positions of visual and physical prominence. Their movements, posture, and control of instruments communicate authority and expertise. The audience, observing both the instruments and the actors, internalizes social lessons. Power is precise, inevitable, and absolute. The prisoner's helplessness mirrors the audience's recognition of their own potential vulnerability, reinforcing obedience through observation. Even subtle instruments play a role in communal perception. Cages, collars, and minor restraint devices communicate potential rather than immediate application. They suggest that all behavior is observed and all transgression measured. The awareness of potential enforcement extends beyond the individual to the collective, teaching vigilance, caution, and the internalization of societal norms. The instruments themselves, even when dormant, are actors in the theater of law. The temporal aspect of these spectacles is deliberate. Pain or discomfort is often applied slowly, incrementally, and rhythmically. Observers witness each stage, noting precision, endurance, and response. The experience is cumulative: the prisoner's reactions, the instrument's mechanical progression, and the unfolding narrative of restraint reinforce both authority and moral instruction. Time itself becomes an instrument, stretching anticipation and perception, and deepening the psychological resonance of the spectacle. Spectacle also serves as a deterrent. The community internalizes lessons of consequence by observing the measured application of restraint and pain. Instruments of torture communicate that actions have consequences, that law is enforceable, and that authority is inescapable. Observation alone is sufficient to influence behavior, producing compliance and reinforcing societal norms. This function demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of social psychology, anticipating responses long before any physical application of pain. Even the design of instruments reflects symbolic intention. Iron, wood, and rope are not merely functional, they carry social, moral, and psychological weight. The size, shape, and arrangement of devices convey severity. The interplay between form and function communicates authority, inevitability, and consequence. Spectators absorb these messages, consciously or subconsciously, reinforcing their understanding of social hierarchy and legal power. Instruments of torture, when used as spectacle, also demonstrate the complexity of human response. Fear, anticipation, empathy, and moral reflection intertwine in observers' minds. The prisoner's body, constrained and displayed, becomes a canvas upon which society projects lessons, warnings, and authority. Every detailed posture, movement, restraint, shadow, and sound contributes to the cumulative narrative of control and instruction. Even after the trial or session concludes, the psychological effects endure. Spectators recall the instruments, the posture of the prisoner, the interplay of shadow and light, and the rhythm of applied tension. These memories reinforce lessons of consequence and hierarchy, extending the impact of torture beyond immediate application. Instruments, chambers, and observation together create a persistent, immersive, and instructive experience. The role of torture as spectacle teaches patience, observation, and reflection. The instruments, carefully engineered and strategically deployed, communicate authority and societal order through both physical and psychological channels. The medieval approach reveals a deep understanding of human perception, response, and the interplay between individual experience and collective observation. Authority, in these chambers, is as much about perception as execution, as much about anticipation as pain. As we step back from the hall, leaving the torches flickering, chains coiled, and instruments silent, the echoes of spectacle linger. The prisoner's posture, the rhythm of applied tension, the interplay of light and shadow, and the communal observation combine to leave an imprint. Torture, in this context, is not simply cruelty, it is an orchestrated performance, a carefully constructed instrument of social, moral, and psychological instruction. In quiet reflection, we understand its complexity, its method, and its enduring lessons about the interplay of fear, authority, and observation. Torture and the art of control. The dungeon, dim and silent, stretches like a cavern of deliberate influence. Stone walls rise heavy and steadfast, absorbing every footstep, every whispered instruction, every faint groan of anticipation. Here, in these corridors and chambers, torture is no longer merely a method of punishment or extraction, it is the delicate, deliberate art of control. Every device, every posture, every measured application of pain, every shadow and flicker of torchlight contributes to a larger orchestration, in which the mind, the body, and the environment are carefully aligned to produce compliance, revelation, and observation. Control begins with the environment. Narrow corridors, low ceilings, uneven floors, and irregular lighting shape perception. The prisoner's senses, constantly stimulated yet deprived of certainty, are primed for response. Anticipation, uncertainty, and constrained mobility heighten awareness. Every creak of a hinge, every scrape of metal, every distant echo becomes a potential signal, a cue interpreted with amplified significance. The architecture itself functions as an instrument, extending the reach of authority beyond the hands of the executioner. Instruments of torture are more than mechanical devices, they are expressions of control. Racks, chains, thumb screws, clamps, and iron braces operate as extensions of the observer's will, calibrated with precision to produce desired reactions. The application of force is measured, incremental, and rhythmic, designed to maintain control over both body and mind. Pain is administered not in chaotic bursts but with deliberate pacing, each adjustment observed, each response noted, each subtle movement interpreted. The executioner, judge, and assistant form a coordinated ensemble, orchestrating experience with intention. Psychological manipulation complements mechanical application. Isolation, sensory deprivation, and anticipation are employed to extend influence. The prisoner may be placed in a dim cell, exposed to shadowed corridors, or left in proximity to instruments without immediate application. The mere presence of restraint produces tension. The mind fills uncertainty with imagined outcomes, enhancing susceptibility to suggestion and observation. Control is thus achieved not only through the body but through the mind's reaction to its environment, a principle recognized and applied with sophistication. Time becomes a malleable instrument in the art of control. Each incremental turn of a rack, each tightening of a screw, each application of a clamp is measured not only by its physical effect but by its temporal impact. Pain administered gradually elongates awareness, stretches seconds into minutes, and transforms anticipation into a slow, cumulative experience. The prisoner's perception of time is manipulated to heighten vulnerability, to amplify the weight of constraint, and to cultivate psychological submission. Even minor devices reinforce authority. Cages, collars, chains, and stocks, though simple in design, communicate control with clarity. Their presence signals limitation, restraint, and surveillance. The prisoner's posture, movement, and expression become instruments through which authority is asserted. The environment, combined with mechanical and psychological tools, produces a comprehensive system of influence, demonstrating an acute awareness of human perception and response. Observation is central to the exercise of control. Executioners and officials closely monitor reactions, flinches, shifts in posture, micro-expressions, and vocalizations are all recorded and interpreted. These responses guide subsequent adjustments, ensuring that instruments operate effectively without exceeding calculated limits. Control is dynamic, responsive, and adaptive, blending mechanical precision with acute attention to human physiology and psychology. The interplay of physical and psychological methods enhances effectiveness. Pain and restraint focus attention, while anticipation, observation, and uncertainty extend. Influence beyond immediate application. The prisoner experiences a continuum of constraint, alternating between periods of direct discomfort and moments of suspended anxiety. Each element, mechanical, environmental, psychological, reinforces the other, producing a layered, immersive experience of submission. Control also manifests in social context. Torture is rarely a private matter, it is enacted in view of officials, witnesses, or communities. This visibility amplifies effect, demonstrating the reach of authority and reinforcing societal norms. The prisoner's body becomes a visual instrument of compliance, a demonstration of consequences, and a cautionary tableau for those observing. Spectators internalize lessons of restraint and hierarchy, extending control beyond the individual to the collective consciousness. Subtlety is a hallmark of this art. Devices may be applied partially or suggestively, producing tension without immediate physical pain. Shadows, light, sound, and anticipation combine to create the sensation of imminent consequence. Even when instruments lie dormant, their presence communicates authority, shaping behavior and perception. Control is thus exercised through both action and suggestion, through presence as well as application. The executioner's role is both technical and interpretive. Knowledge of anatomy, psychology, and perception informs each adjustment, ensuring that restraint and pain achieve intended effects. Observation of the prisoner's responses informs modulation, rhythm, and duration. Instruments are not applied indiscriminately, they are tools of precise influence, calibrated to maximize compliance, endurance, and revelation. Psychological conditioning extends to repetition. Prisoners may experience cycles of application and respite, alternating between discomfort and anticipation. These cycles cultivate awareness of authority, heighten expectation, and reinforce vulnerability. The prisoner learns patterns of control, internalizing lessons of submission and influence. Even minor fluctuations in mechanical tension or environmental cues reinforce perception of continuous oversight. Control is also exercised through symbolic representation. Instruments convey authority beyond their immediate function. Chains, collars, and racks are visual declarations of restraint, compliance, and power. Their arrangement, alignment, and visibility communicate moral and social order. The prisoner's posture, movements, and responses become a medium through which these messages are enacted. Authority is embedded in both physical experience and symbolic presence. Anticipation remains a key element. Prisoners, aware of potential application, experience tension continuously. The mind generates scenarios of impending pain, heightening awareness, sensitivity, and psychological vulnerability. Even in moments of respite, the prisoner remains under subtle influence, illustrating that control extends beyond immediate physical coercion. This orchestration demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of how perception, expectation, and imagination shape response. Environmental manipulation complements these techniques. Corridors, cells, lighting, and sound all contribute to psychological control. Subtle variations in torchlight, shadows cast on stone walls, and distant echoes of movement heighten uncertainty and vigilance. Every sensory input is considered, producing a controlled experience in which perception becomes a vehicle for authority. The prisoner's experience is cumulative. Physical restraint, mechanical application, psychological manipulation, environmental cues, and social observation interact to produce a comprehensive system of control. Each element reinforces the others, creating an immersive experience in which submission is gradually cultivated and maintained. Control is not imposed abruptly but achieved through deliberate, sustained orchestration. Even after instruments are removed, the influence endures. Memory of constraint, anticipation, and observation shapes future behavior. The prisoner internalizes lessons of authority, submission, and vigilance, extending the effect of control beyond immediate experience. Instruments, chambers, and social context together produce enduring psychological impact, demonstrating the potency of carefully orchestrated influence. This art, refined over centuries, reveals an intricate understanding of human perception and behavior. Control is exercised not only through physical means but through anticipation, observation, environment, and social context. Torture becomes a multidimensional instrument, integrating body, mind, and society into a single, coherent system of influence. Authority, in this context, is both mechanical and psychological, immediate and enduring, visible and symbolic. In the quiet reflection of the dungeon, the prisoner's posture, the instruments, and the architecture together reveal the subtlety of this art. Control is measured, precise, and patient. Anticipation, observation, and suggestion operate in harmony with mechanical restraint, producing a layered experience of authority. The medieval executioner, in exercising this art, demonstrates a profound understanding of the human condition, that submission, endurance, and psychological influence can be cultivated with subtlety, patience, and insight. As we step back from the chamber, leaving chains coiled, racks silent, and shadowed corridors stretching into darkness, the echoes of control remain. The prisoner's body and mind, shaped by experience, perception, and anticipation, carry forward the lessons of authority, restraint, and influence. Instruments, environment, and observation converge to produce not only compliance but reflection, a testament to the meticulous, profound, and haunting art of control. Torture and public perception. Beyond the stone corridors, beyond the echoing halls of chains and racks, the medieval world observed its rituals. Torture was never merely a private matter, it was a spectacle, a lens through which society perceived law, justice, and power. The instruments, the chambers, and the deliberate orchestration of pain all became components in a larger tableau, reflecting social, moral, and political structures. Understanding public perception requires entering the minds not only of the prisoner but of those who watched, those who whispered in the corridors, and those who returned home with images of iron and shadow lingering behind their eyelids. Imagine a town square, sun slanting through clouds, where the sounds of the market mingle with anticipation. A procession arrives, officials, guards, and attendants leading the accused into view. The instruments already present stocks, chains, racks, clamps, and cages. Their polished surfaces catch the light, and their looming forms communicate authority. The prisoner's posture, already constrained by chains or ropes, becomes a symbol. The audience interprets every flinch, every step, every hesitation. Each movement conveys guilt, defiance, or submission, and the public internalizes these cues as reflections of moral order. The role of expectation is profound. Before any device is applied, the mind of the observer constructs its own narrative. Shadows stretching across walls appear larger, the creak of iron becomes foreboding, and even subtle gestures of the prisoner acquire exaggerated significance. The audience becomes engaged in an elaborate, unspoken contract, to witness, to judge, and to internalize. Torture is thus as much psychological for the spectators as for the victim. The orchestration of perception is deliberate, producing a slow, cumulative effect that resonates long after the session ends. Devices themselves are central to shaping public perception. Stocks immobilize the accused in full view, positioning the body as a moral tableau. The rack stretches limbs, illustrating vulnerability and the reach of authority. Iron braces, thumbscrews, and clamps produce visual cues of severity. Even devices not yet applied communicate latent power. Their presence conveys inevitability, reinforcing the audience's sense of order, hierarchy, and the consequences of transgression. Each object contributes to a visual and psychological narrative of justice, morality, and social control. Light and shadow amplify these effects. Sunlight or torchlight illuminates instruments in a way that accentuates form, exaggerates scale, and transforms familiar shapes into threatening presences. Shadows cast across walls stretch and distort, making chains appear longer, racks appear taller, and iron braces seem more imposing. The prisoner's silhouette, framed against this shifting interplay of light and shadow, communicates vulnerability, consequence, and authority. The visual orchestration itself becomes a lesson for observers, shaping perception through careful manipulation of the environment. Sound, too, influences perception. The creak of a chain, the scrape of metal against stone, the measured twist of a rack. These auditory cues are amplified in the medieval hall or town square. Even before instruments are applied, the anticipation generated by these sounds signals authority and imminent consequence. Observers, attuned to rhythm and tone, internalize lessons of power and restraint. The auditory dimension interacts with visual cues, creating a multisensory experience that reinforces societal norms and expectations. The communal nature of observation intensifies impact. Spectators exchange glances, whispers, and subtle gestures. They interpret the prisoner's responses collectively, constructing shared narratives about guilt, compliance, or morality. Public perception is shaped not solely by the prisoner's experience but by collective interpretation of posture, expression, and reaction. The audience internalizes these lessons, reinforcing norms, hierarchies, and moral codes. Social cohesion is maintained through observation, anticipation, and interpretation. Public expectation also shapes execution. The pace and intensity of application are calibrated to meet both practical and perceptual needs. Executioners adjust methods to maintain audience engagement, ensuring that instruments communicate authority effectively. Pain and restraint are applied with awareness of communal observation, producing an experience that is simultaneously physical, psychological, and social. Authority is demonstrated not only through mechanical application but through orchestration of perception and timing. Repetition and ritual reinforce public perception. Torture, applied in cycles of application and respite, produces cumulative impressions. Observers witness progression, the initial application of restraint, the gradual intensification of discomfort, and eventual resolution or reprieve. These patterns reinforce lessons about compliance, endurance, and moral consequence. The audience absorbs not only the immediate display but the rhythm and structure of authority itself. Anticipation, suspense, and resolution operate as social instruments, shaping perception through temporal as well as spatial experience. Symbolism extends the reach of these spectacles. Chains, racks, cages, and clamps communicate power beyond their immediate function. The presence of instruments, their polished surfaces, and their deliberate arrangement convey moral and social authority. Even the prisoner's posture immobilized, exposed, tense becomes a symbolic vehicle through which societal norms are transmitted. Observers learn lessons about hierarchy, obedience, and consequence, reinforcing collective understanding of order. Fear, both direct and vicarious, underpins public perception. Observers experience anticipation through empathy or projection, imagining the sensations of the prisoner and internalizing the consequences. The mind interprets subtle cues, flinches, shifts in posture, strained expressions as evidence of pain, vulnerability, and authority. Public perception, thus, is shaped by observation, imagination, and social interpretation. The instruments, though silent, communicate continuously, operating on both the body of the prisoner and the mind of the audience. Cultural and religious context further shapes perception. Torture is framed within moral, legal, and spiritual narratives. Instruments are seen not merely as mechanical tools but as agents of justice, morality, and divine authority. Observers internalize these associations, linking physical constraint with moral consequence. Pain, anticipation, and observation operate within a structured framework of belief, reinforcing cultural norms and ethical hierarchies. The psychological dimension extends to social memory. Stories of torture, instruments, and outcomes circulate long after the events themselves. Spectators recount sequences, describe devices, and reflect on reactions. The social narrative preserves the experience, extending the impact of instruments beyond immediate observation. Public perception becomes institutionalized, embedded in collective memory, and transmitted across generations. The instruments themselves, though silent, leave enduring imprints through social awareness and memory. Even minor details contribute to perception. The alignment of chains, the placement of clamps, the positioning of the prisoner's limbs all communicate precision, authority, and inevitability. Observers interpret these arrangements as deliberate and controlled, reinforcing their understanding of hierarchical power. Subtle cues, often unnoticed consciously, shape perception through microexpression, shadow, rhythm, and posture. The visual and psychological orchestration is deliberate, producing a holistic effect that extends beyond immediate sensation. Observation shapes behavior as well. Spectators, internalizing lessons of consequence, adjust actions, speech, and moral judgments accordingly. Fear, anticipation, and empathy operate in concert to reinforce societal norms. The instruments of torture, the choreography of application, and the communal observation together produce a layered network of influence, shaping both individual and collective behavior. Authority, conveyed through spectacle, becomes internalized, extending the reach of instruments beyond their immediate mechanical function. Even after public sessions conclude, perception persists. Audiences carry memories of posture, restraint, shadow, sound, and timing. The prisoner's body, the instruments, and the orchestration of anticipation leave traces in consciousness. Stories, reflections, and lessons circulate within the community, embedding the impact of torture in both social understanding and cultural memory. Instruments, chambers, and observation converge to produce enduring influence, a subtle yet profound shaping of thought, behavior, and social cohesion. Public perception, thus, is inseparable from the practice of torture. It is shaped through a combination of visual cues, auditory signals, environmental manipulation, psychological orchestration, social observation, and cultural framing. Instruments of restraint, while mechanical, operate within a network of meaning, perception, and expectation, producing effects that extend far beyond the body of the prisoner. The art of public perception demonstrates sophisticated awareness of human psychology, social interaction, and the enduring influence of spectacle. In quiet reflection, one can trace the layers, chains, racks, iron braces, shadows, light, sound, timing, and social context intertwining to create a controlled, immersive experience. Fear, anticipation, empathy, and moral judgment operate together, shaping perception and reinforcing authority. Torture, observed and remembered, becomes more than a tool of pain, it becomes an instrument of social and psychological influence. The medieval mind, in orchestrating public perception, demonstrates insight, patience, and deliberate skill, ensuring that instruments, bodies, and observation converge to leave enduring impressions on both individual and collective consciousness. As we leave the square, the corridors, and the flickering torchlight behind, the echoes of observation remain. Chains, racks, clamps, and cages continue to communicate authority, even in absence. The lessons internalized, the anticipation endured, and the symbolic resonance of posture and restraint linger in memory. Public perception, shaped through careful orchestration of instruments, environment, and social context, is a profound testament to the subtle, enduring, and haunting influence of the art of torture. The end of the torture session, reflection and aftermath. The hall falls silent. The clatter of chains has ceased, the rack lies still, and the air, once taut with anticipation, trembles in the slow descent of released tension. The prisoner, now still or slowly lowered from restraints, occupies the center of a space transformed from theater to quietude. Here, at the conclusion of the session, the instruments of pain lie dormant, their purpose completed, yet their influence persists. In these moments, reflection settles over the stone corridors, over the guards who maintained vigilance, over officials who orchestrated the performance, and even over the prisoner whose body and mind have borne the weight of mechanical and psychological influence. The aftermath begins with observation. Executioners and assistants assess the state of the prisoner, posture, breathing, the subtle tremor of muscles, the pallor of skin, the flicker of eyes. Each detail is scrutinized, not only to ensure physical survival but to interpret compliance, endurance, and psychological submission. The instruments, though no longer active, have left their mark. The prisoner's body is a living record, a testament to authority applied, a reflection of control maintained. These assessments are meticulous, deliberate, a final act in the choreography of restraint. Physical recovery intertwines with social and psychological restoration. Chains and restraints are carefully removed, the prisoner's limbs, stiff and bruised, are gently guided back to a position of partial freedom. Even as pain recedes, awareness of consequence lingers. The mind continues to replay anticipation, application, and restraint, embedding lessons in endurance, submission, and authority. Every groan, every flinch, every conscious breath contributes to the cumulative impact of experience. The end of the session is not merely cessation but continuation in reflection, in awareness, in memory. The executioners themselves reflect, silently, upon their role. They have administered force with precision, calibrated pressure, and maintained strict observation. Their expertise lies not only in mechanical proficiency but in understanding the interplay of body, mind, and environment. Each movement was deliberate, each adjustment measured. In the quiet after action, they consider their performance, aware that control extends beyond direct application to the psychological, social, and symbolic dimensions of influence. This reflection ensures the art of restraint continues to evolve, informed by observation, outcome, and subtle feedback from the prisoner. The prisoner's perception evolves during this aftermath. Pain may recede, yet tension remains, woven into memory and muscle. Limbs loosen slowly, heart rate declines gradually, but the mental imprint of anticipation and exposure endures. The prisoner recalls every shadow, every sound, every sensation of chains and clamps. The mind traces patterns of authority, rhythm, and observation, internalizing lessons beyond immediate sensation. Reflection during this stage reinforces obedience, endurance, and psychological imprinting. The end of action is merely the beginning of lingering influence. Social context magnifies this reflection. Observers, guards, and officials witness the final stages, chains removed, restraints lifted, the prisoner's posture adjusting to renewed freedom. Collective interpretation shapes ongoing perception, the prisoner's endurance, reactions, and compliance are narrated, retold, and remembered. Spectators internalize lessons of hierarchy, morality, and consequence, extending the impact of instruments beyond mechanical application. The social memory of restraint is constructed as carefully as the application itself. Environmental cues continue to influence perception. Torches dim, shadows shift, echoes fade, and stone walls, once resonating with creaks, groans, and metallic sounds, return to quiet. Yet subtle cues remain, the faint smell of iron, the polished surface of instruments, the indentation of floorboards under chains. These elements anchor memory, linking the physical environment to psychological impressions. Control is extended not only through applied force but through persistent environmental resonance. The reflection also extends temporally. Prisoners and observers alike carry impressions forward, replaying events in memory. The timing of application, the gradual progression of tension, the incremental release, all contribute to a cumulative understanding of authority. The end of the session is experienced not only in the present but in recollection, in anticipation of future enforcement, and in projection of potential consequence. Instruments, posture, environment, and observation together produce enduring temporal resonance. Moral and psychological dimensions emerge strongly in this phase. The prisoner contemplates endurance, compliance, and submission, while officials consider justice, hierarchy, and the demonstration of power. Observers, including guards and community members, internalize lessons, reinforcing social norms and ethical codes. The end of the session, while physically final, produces an extended moral dialogue, where body, mind, and society intersect to reinforce authority, consequence, and compliance. The instruments themselves, now inert, retain symbolic authority. Chains, racks, clamps, and braces stand as silent witnesses, their presence conveying both past action and latent potential. Even in dormancy, they communicate inevitability, reinforcing lessons in restraint and consequence. The architecture, the alignment of devices, and the residual sensory cues collectively sustain influence, ensuring that control persists beyond immediate application. Physical recovery is deliberate and meticulous. Executioners may massage strained muscles, support fragile limbs, or provide guidance to prevent injury. Subtle gestures of care paradoxically reinforce authority, signaling that oversight extends beyond pain to encompass restoration. The prisoner experiences a continuum of influence, from anticipation, to application, to reflection, to post-session observation and guidance. Each phase reinforces lessons of endurance, submission, and authority. Psychological influence remains profound. The prisoner's mind continues to oscillate between memory, anticipation of future encounters, and internalization of social lessons. Reflection is structured, deliberate, and amplified by the cumulative experience of restraint, observation, and social embedding. Even absence of instruments cannot erase the intricate network of impressions formed during application and observation. Control has transitioned from external application to internalized comprehension, demonstrating the sophistication of the medieval approach. Public perception extends into the aftermath. Observers, retelling sequences, narrating details, and interpreting reactions, reinforce social lessons. The prisoner becomes a narrative anchor, a living illustration of consequence, endurance, and authority. Stories circulate through corridors, marketplaces, and households, extending the reach of instruments beyond immediate observation. Public perception, memory, and retelling consolidate the enduring influence of torture as social and psychological instrument. Reflection encompasses both subtle and overt effects. The prisoner may experience relief, fear, shame, endurance, and compliance simultaneously. Officials observe precision, skill, and effect. Spectators interpret moral, ethical, and hierarchical cues. Instruments, though dormant, continue to communicate. Every shadow, echo, and visual cue sustains resonance. Torture, even concluded in physical action, remains active in perception, memory, and social discourse. Time itself functions in reflection. Days, weeks, and months following the session carry echoes of influence. Memories of chains, racks, clamps, posture, shadow, and sound persist, influencing behavior, obedience, and moral calculation. Social narratives perpetuate lessons. The prisoner's mind remains shaped, the official's. Expertise evolves, and the collective perception of authority solidifies. Reflection, thus, extends beyond immediate aftermath into long-term psychological and social influence. Even in absence, instruments remain potent symbols. Chains coiled on the floor, racks idle against walls, clamps resting in alignment all communicate latent authority. The architecture and arrangement of space reinforce perception of power. The prisoner's body, once constrained, continues to embody lessons of restraint. Observers internalize these cues as moral, ethical, and societal instruction, reinforcing hierarchy, obedience, and awareness of consequence. The slow, deliberate orchestration of end-phase reflection demonstrates the medieval understanding of human perception and psychology. Physical cessation does not imply absence of effect. Anticipation, memory, observation, and social embedding ensure continued influence. The prisoner, officials, and observers alike participate in a continuum where authority, endurance, compliance, and perception interact, extending the reach of instruments beyond mechanical application. In the hush of the hall, one perceives subtle echoes, faint creaks of residual chains, lingering shadow across the floor, the polished surface of instruments reflecting soft torchlight. The prisoner's posture, now free, still carries traces of endurance. Officials note precision, skill, and effect. Observers mentally reconstruct the tableau. Instruments, chambers, and human bodies together maintain an intricate dialogue of control, reflection, and societal resonance. Ultimately, the conclusion of the torture session is not merely mechanical, it is narrative, psychological, and social. Chains lie dormant, yet lessons endure. Posture, shadow, light, and echo perpetuate influence. The prisoner internalizes lessons of compliance, endurance, and hierarchy. Observers internalize social, ethical, and moral narratives. Officials refine expertise. Instruments, architecture, and environment collectively ensure that the art of torture, though physically paused, continues to operate in perception, reflection, and memory. As we leave the silent hall, walking past dormant racks and coiled chains, the lingering atmosphere carries subtle lessons. Anticipation, restraint, observation, and reflection converge to form a tapestry of authority and influence. The end of application is simply a stage in the continuous, immersive, and profound process by which power, perception, and compliance intertwine. Reflection and aftermath, subtle yet enduring, transform temporary physical experience into lasting psychological and social imprint, leaving both prisoner and society permanently touched by the art of measured control. The legacy of torture, memory, myth, and cultural echoes. Long after the echoes of chains and the groans of restrained bodies have faded, the legacy of torture endures. It exists not only in the instruments themselves, dormant and polished, but in memory, myth, and cultural narrative. The shadow of iron, wood, and rope extends across generations, leaving traces in literature, folklore, art, and collective consciousness. In examining this legacy, one begins to understand how these practices, once intensely immediate and tactile, became woven into the fabric of social imagination, moral reflection, and historical memory. The instruments, carefully designed and applied, have long since been relegated to quiet chambers of museums, stone-walled storage, and scholarly texts. Yet they continue to exert influence through symbolic presence. A rack, a chain, an iron brace, or a cage becomes more than a relic, it is a vessel for stories of power, compliance, suffering, and control. Visitors observe, and imagination reconstructs the past. Shadows of anticipation, echoes of mechanical resistance, and impressions of human endurance resurface in the mind, demonstrating the enduring potency of memory even when the instruments themselves are silent. Oral tradition played a significant role in perpetuating this legacy. Tales passed down in whispers, recounted in hushed tones around hearths or in marketplace corners, carried vivid depictions of torture long after the devices were no longer in use. Prisoners, witnesses, and guards contributed their own memories, each layering perspective, exaggeration, and moral interpretation upon the next. These narratives transformed immediate experience into legend, embedding lessons of authority, consequence, and social hierarchy into cultural memory. The stories were both cautionary and instructive, shaping collective perception of law, justice, and moral boundaries. Literature, too, preserved echoes of these acts. Chroniclers, poets, and scholars documented methods, instruments, and effects, often blending observation with moral reflection. Descriptions of racks and chains, clamps and iron maidens, served dual purposes, recording history and conveying social lessons. Artistic exaggeration, the dramatization of pain and anticipation, and the detailed attention to posture, shadow, and sound amplified both the horror and the instruction. Readers, removed from immediate danger, were invited to witness, imagine, and internalize lessons of authority and compliance, creating a bridge between past reality and enduring cultural consciousness. Visual representation extended influence further. Engravings, woodcuts, and illuminated manuscripts depicted instruments of torture with meticulous detail. Each depiction emphasized posture, restraint, and environment. The alignment of chains, the tension of racks, the gleam of iron, all elements were consciously rendered to evoke emotional response, moral reflection, and psychological engagement. Art became a medium through which instruments, once active, could perpetuate influence, transforming mechanical power into visual and symbolic authority. Cultural reflection on torture also evolved over time. In some traditions, instruments were demonized, associated with cruelty, injustice, and the excesses of power. In others, they were framed as necessary agents of law and morality, enforcing divine or societal order. The narrative context shaped perception, instruments became symbols of oppression, morality, or social control depending on interpretation. Memory, myth, and cultural discourse combined to produce nuanced, multi-layered legacy, ensuring that the lessons of restraint, anticipation, and authority remained embedded in collective consciousness. Psychological echoes persisted alongside social and artistic ones. Generations grew up learning of these instruments not only through observation but through imagination. Fear, anticipation, and moral caution were internalized through indirect exposure to narratives of restraint and suffering. The mind reconstructed scenarios, replayed gestures, imagined sounds, and anticipated the consequences described in oral and literary tradition. Instruments that were once tangible became psychological tools, shaping behavior, compliance, and moral judgment long after physical application ceased. The symbolic dimension of instruments persisted even as technology and methods evolved. Racks, chains, iron maidens, and clamps entered metaphoric language, representing power, restraint, and moral consequence in speech and literature. References to these devices communicated authority, fear, or moral warning without direct application. Social memory transformed physical practice into abstract principle, extending influence into realms of thought, morality, and imagination. The lessons of endurance, compliance, and hierarchical obedience persisted, now mediated through symbol rather than sensation. Education and scholarship further codified the legacy. Historians, anthropologists, and legal scholars examined documents, instruments, and accounts, preserving precise records while reflecting on social and moral implications. Academic work bridged the gap between tangible instruments and cultural memory, offering reflective analysis that illuminated both mechanical technique and psychological impact. The meticulous attention to detail, observation, and interpretation mirrored the care once applied in chambers of torture, demonstrating a parallel between historical understanding and practical orchestration. The moral and ethical reflection embedded in cultural memory also shaped future social structures. Awareness of past restraint and suffering influenced legal reforms, societal norms, and attitudes toward authority. Instruments of torture, once central to enforcement, became historical markers against which new systems of justice were measured. Memory of suffering, observation of compliance, and reflection on moral consequence collectively informed evolving frameworks of law, ethics, and human rights. The legacy of torture extended beyond memory, shaping behavior, policy, and societal conscience across centuries. Psychological resonance extended into literature, folklore, and theater. Stories of endurance, suffering, and compliance became moral allegories, reinforcing collective understanding of hierarchy, power, and consequence. The human experience of anticipation, observation, and reflection was embedded in narrative form, producing immersive engagement for readers, audiences, and future generations. Instruments, now absent in physical function, maintained influence through the imagination, evoking emotional, cognitive, and ethical reflection. Memory of torture also persisted through community practices. Ritualized recounting, moral instruction, and civic storytelling reinforced lessons of authority, endurance, and social hierarchy. Instruments, posture, shadow, sound, and narrative were interwoven into social pedagogy, creating structured and shared understanding of consequence and compliance. The cumulative effect of these practices ensured that lessons derived from mechanical and psychological control endured, embedded in collective perception and cultural consciousness. Even in modern times, the echo of medieval instruments persists. Museums, historical texts, films, and reenactments evoke the sensory, psychological, and symbolic resonance of restraint and pain. Shadows of chains, the gleam of iron, and the imagined tension of a rack continue to provoke reflection, moral contemplation, and empathetic engagement. The instruments are silent, yet perception of their former function continues to shape thought, emotion, and imagination. Legacy endures not through action but through observation, reflection, and cultural resonance. Social, ethical, and psychological lessons intertwine. Instruments once applied with precision for control, compliance, and observation now exist as reminders of human capacity for endurance, cruelty, and authority. Reflection on past practice prompts moral engagement, ethical evaluation, and psychological insight. The prisoner's experience, once immediate and tactile, becomes narrative, memory, and symbol. Cultural echoes ensure that instruments, shadow, and observation retain profound influence, bridging centuries of social consciousness. Memory, myth, and cultural discourse together constitute a living archive. Instruments of torture, though no longer in use, communicate authority, hierarchy, and consequence through observation, imagination, and interpretation. The lessons of endurance, compliance, and moral reflection persist, extended through narrative, art, literature, scholarship, and performance. Instruments become symbolic, psychological, and ethical artifacts, sustaining influence in both individual perception and collective consciousness. Ultimately, the legacy of torture demonstrates the intricate relationship between mechanical application, psychological influence, social observation, and cultural memory. Instruments, posture, shadow, sound, and anticipation converge to produce immediate effect, which, through reflection, narration, and cultural transmission, becomes an enduring influence. Pain, restraint, and authority evolve into myth, symbol, and psychological architecture, ensuring that lessons of control, morality, and human endurance echo across centuries. As we leave the silent chambers, the shadowed corridors, and the dormant instruments behind, the echoes persist. Chains, racks, iron braces, and clamps remain potent not only in memory but in imagination, narrative, and cultural consciousness. The medieval world, in applying these devices with meticulous skill, created a legacy that transcends the physical, extending into social, moral, and psychological realms. Instruments, once active, are now silent teachers, and their lessons continue to resonate in reflection, myth, and enduring cultural echo. A silent reflection on the age of torture. As the last echo of chains fades and the stone corridors lie in a quiet stillness, we step back from the instruments, the halls, and the shadows to consider the age they inhabited. Here, in the aftermath of racks, clamps, iron maidens, and chains, the silence itself becomes profound. The air, once heavy with anticipation, groans, and metallic resonance, is now a space for reflection, a gentle, contemplative pause. We are invited, not to relive pain, but to trace its imprint across mind, society, and memory, moving slowly through history in a way that allows understanding, empathy, and quiet absorption. Torture, as we have followed it through these chapters, was never merely mechanical. It was performance, ritual, social instruction, and moral demonstration. Each instrument, the rack that stretched limbs, the iron maiden that enclosed, the chains that bound, the clamps that twisted, was designed with meticulous care, both to induce suffering and to communicate power. Yet beyond the immediate, tangible application lay subtler mechanisms: anticipation, observation, societal expectation, psychological orchestration, and reflection. In every act, whether overt or seemingly small, authority extended into the minds of both prisoner and observer. The body of the prisoner, constrained and tested, becomes a canvas upon which lessons of endurance, submission, and hierarchy are painted. Posture, flinch, pulse, and breath communicate narrative in the silent language of suffering. The prisoner internalizes both pain and meaning, creating a bridge between action and understanding. Even when instruments are removed, when clamps and chains lie dormant, their influence endures, embedded in memory, posture, and cognition. Pain transforms into reflection, suffering into social and psychological lessons, authority into enduring awareness. Observing communities, too, carry the weight of these experiences. Townsfolk, guards, officials, and witnesses internalize what they see, reconstructing every nuance of shadow, sound, gesture, and posture. Collective observation functions as a mirror of societal values, reinforcing norms, morality, and hierarchy. Anticipation, fear, and empathy interweave to create a shared social consciousness, extending the effect of instruments beyond the immediate event. Public perception becomes as central to the practice as the instruments themselves, a subtle yet pervasive layer of influence that persists long after the session ends. The instruments, silent in their dormancy, continue to speak. Chains coiled neatly on stone floors, racks idle against walls, clamps resting in their polished alignment all communicate authority, consequence, and potential. Even in absence, their presence resonates in imagination and memory. The mind reconstructs anticipation, tension, and eventual resolution, and the lessons learned through observation and experience remain active, shaping behavior, thought, and moral understanding. Authority survives in shadow and in symbol, in absence as powerfully as in presence. Beyond immediate perception, stories, myths, and memory preserve the legacy of torture across generations. Oral narratives, chronicled accounts, and artistic depictions transmit both method and meaning. They extend influence from isolated events into communal consciousness, embedding lessons about endurance, morality, social order, and consequence. Artistic representations, woodcuts, engravings, illustrations blend visual accuracy with psychological and moral interpretation. Observers, separated by centuries from the original chambers, are invited into the experience, imagining sensations, shadows, sounds, and moral weight. Memory and imagination bridge time, sustaining influence beyond the physical instruments themselves. The psychological dimension is profound. Anticipation, dread, reflection, and understanding combine to produce long-lasting cognitive and emotional effects. Even those never directly subjected to instruments of torture engage with their symbolic power. Through storytelling, art, literature, and history, the mind encounters restraint, endurance, and authority, internalizing lessons and moral reflection. The prisoner's experience becomes a template for empathy and understanding, for comprehension of power, fear, and endurance in both historical and contemporary contexts. Reflection on the social and ethical implications deepens understanding. Torture was intertwined with law, religion, and morality, acting as both punishment and lesson. It demonstrated the reach of authority and the consequences of transgression, serving as a mechanism of control, pedagogy, and social cohesion. Observers internalize these lessons, allowing the practice to influence society far beyond its immediate victims. Memory and myth extend these lessons, transforming acts of cruelty into cautionary narratives and symbols of ethical reflection. The artful orchestration of perception, both immediate and long-term, highlights a subtle mastery. Chains, racks, iron braces, and clamps were applied with careful attention to timing, rhythm, and presentation. Shadows, light, sound, posture, and audience engagement were all calibrated to communicate authority effectively. Even after application, the instrument's arrangement, presence, and symbolic weight continued to influence thought, emotion, and social memory. The medieval understanding of human perception and behavior, applied with deliberate skill, ensured that the lessons of restraint endured far beyond the physical act. Cultural memory, myth, and narrative sustain the legacy across centuries. Instruments become metaphors. Stories of endurance and suffering become moral allegories. Historians, scholars, artists, and writers reconstruct sequences, interpret intent, and reflect on meaning, preserving lessons for subsequent generations. The human mind, attuned to story, symbol, and psychological resonance, continues to engage with the past, drawing reflection, empathy, and moral understanding from instruments that are themselves silent. Even in contemporary times, museums, texts, and reenactments evoke these impressions. The sight of a rack, the silhouette of an iron maiden, the coiled tension of chains, these images invite reflection on endurance, morality, authority, and consequence. Observers reconstruct shadow, sound, and posture in imagination. They contemplate the mind of the prisoner, the precision of executioners, and the responses of communities. Legacy continues, not in action, but in observation, understanding, and reflection. The final epilogue is, therefore, a meditation on continuity. Chains and racks, iron maidens and clamps, are more than historical curiosities, they are instruments of reflection, symbols of human psychology, and enduring markers of moral, social, and ethical engagement. The shadow of their existence stretches across time, reaching minds and hearts long after physical application ceased. Memory and myth converge to ensure that lessons of power, endurance, and compliance persist, quietly shaping understanding, conscience, and imagination. In the stillness of the empty hall, one might imagine faint echoes of footsteps, the subtle creak of iron, the whisper of chains settling back into position. Shadows stretch long and soft along the stone walls. Torches, now extinguished, leave traces of light and shadow in memory, as though the mind itself illuminates what once existed. The prisoner's posture, the observer's gaze, the executioner's careful calibration all remain vivid in imagination. Even absence cannot erase presence. The instruments continue to teach, warn, and reflect through narrative, memory, and symbol. We close this meditation gently, allowing the mind to rest. The instruments, the halls, the echoes of history, and the layered legacy of human endurance, observation, and reflection recede into quiet. Knowledge of pain, authority, and compliance remains, transformed into empathy, understanding, and contemplative awareness. The age of torture, once immediate, visceral, and relentless, now exists in quiet meditation, in the space between shadow and memory, sound and silence, action and reflection. And so, as we leave the silent chambers behind, the mind carries lessons softly, without urgency, without alarm, in the hush of understanding. The echo of chains and racks, of iron maidens and clamps, becomes a gentle reminder that human endurance, moral reflection, observation, and memory persist far beyond the immediate, shaping thought, conscience, and imagination across centuries. In this quiet reflection, the age of torture, once harsh and deliberate, becomes a slow, dreamlike meditation, a testament to the interplay of body, mind, society, and memory, and a subtle, lasting guide to human understanding. Here, in the hush of memory and imagination, we leave the instruments behind, yet their lessons remain. Shadows fade, chains rest, iron cools, and silence prevails, but reflection, empathy, and historical consciousness endure. The age of torture rests now in quiet, its legacy preserved not through pain, but through understanding, observation, and the gentle unfolding of human contemplation.